Hello. Friends, do you think drinking a little extra at your wife's New Year's Eve corporate party is a crime? Absolutely not. Is it a crime for my wife to publicly flirt with her boss in front of me? Absolutely. That's exactly the kind of trouble I got into on this seemingly perfect evening. But let's just say I didn't see it coming, or rather, I didn't notice it. Maybe the smooth whiskey was to blame. Maybe it was the festive glow of the city lights. Or maybe I was just too blind to see what was right in front of me. But everything changed the next day. A message from an unknown number. A handful of photos. A pit in my stomach that wouldn't go away. And just like that, the countdown to the end of what I thought was a happy marriage had begun. Now, let's go back to that unfortunate evening. The one where I unknowingly lost everything. The towering skyline of Seattle, Washington, stretched beyond the ballroom windows, casting shimmering reflections over the dark waters of Elliott Bay. Inside the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, golden chandeliers bathed the room in warm light, illuminating the city's elite as they mingled, laughed, and toasted to a new year full of endless possibilities. I had never particularly enjoyed corporate events, but Olivia, my wife, had insisted I come. She had promised it would be fun. Of course, her definition of fun involved business talk, networking, and charming the right people. All things I had zero interest in. But she was ambitious, a rising star at Merrick and Caldwell, one of the biggest investment firms in the Pacific Northwest, and if this night was important to her, I could at least pretend to enjoy myself. So, I put on my best suit, nodded through the introductions, and downed drink after drink to make the night a little more bearable. That's how it happened. Somewhere between my second and fourth Macallan 12, my vision blurred slightly, and the edges of conversations began to fade. Olivia floated around the room, dazzling in her emerald green dress, her laughter carrying over the jazz band's soft melody. I watched her from a distance, admiring how easily she commanded attention. And then, at some point, I stopped watching. I was too busy indulging in another round with Mark, my best friend and the only other person in the room who wasn't pretending to care about stocks, market trends, or quarterly reports. Man, you are putting those away, Mark had laughed, nudging me as I drained another glass. Liv's got this crowd covered, I had shrugged. I'm just here for the free drinks. And I was. So, I didn't see it. I didn't see the way Olivia leaned in a little too close to Ethan Calloway, her boss. I didn't see his hand hover just a second too long on the small of her back. I didn't hear their hushed voices, their laughter that carried just a little too softly over the music. But someone else did. And they made sure I saw it the next day. The hangover was brutal. The morning light stabbed through the bedroom curtains as I groaned, rubbing my temples. The sound of dishes clinking downstairs told me Olivia was already up, moving about like nothing had happened. Leo, 8, and Ava, 5, were laughing, their voices carrying through the house, blissfully unaware that their father felt like his skull was splitting in two. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, squinting at the screen. A few missed calls from Mark, a text from my brother wishing me a happy new year, and one message from an unknown number. Unknown number, you should see this. Attached were 4 photos. I frowned, swiping to open them. The first was from the party. Olivia at the bar, talking to Ethan. Nothing unusual. She had mentioned him plenty of times before. The second made me sit up. Ethan was leaning in, saying something into her ear. Olivia was smiling. Not a polite smile. A different kind of smile. The third shot was worse. Ethan's hand, low on her back. The kind of touch that wasn't just friendly. The kind of touch that suggested familiarity. The fourth? A grainy, zoomed-in photo of a black Mercedes S-Class, parked outside the hotel. Inside, 2 figures sat too close together. My stomach twisted. Unknown number. You deserve the truth. I stared at the screen, my fingers tightening around the phone. The room felt colder. The hangover was gone, replaced by something worse. Something darker. A knock at the door. Hey man, you good? Mark. I hesitated before turning my phone toward him. He took it, scrolling through the pictures, his expression darkening with every swipe. Shit, he muttered. I forced a laugh. A hollow, empty laugh. It's nothing, right? Just out-of-context shots? Mark didn't say anything at first. He scrolled back up, studying the images again, then exhaled slowly. "You sure?" he asked. I needed him to say yes. I needed him to tell me I was being ridiculous, that Olivia would never do something like this. But he didn't. And that's when I knew. Whether I wanted to believe it or not, this wasn't nothing. This was the beginning of something I couldn't ignore. The beginning of the end. Daniel tried to shake it off. He really did. Maybe it was the whiskey from that night still messing with his head. Maybe it was just paranoia, his mind twisting a few blurry photos into something more sinister than they actually were. Olivia had never given him a reason to doubt her. She was ambitious, hardworking. Hell, she barely had time for him, let alone an affair. And yet, it was the way those images sat in his phone, burning a hole in his thoughts no matter how hard he tried to ignore them. He hadn't even confronted Olivia about them. What was he supposed to say? "Hey, some random number sent me pictures of you with your boss, so now I think you're cheating?" That sounded insane. So, instead, he told himself a lie, that he was overthinking it, that his wife was loyal, and he had nothing to worry about. But lies don't hold up against reality for long. The first thing he noticed was her phone. Olivia had never been one of those people who treated her phone like an extension of her hand. She used it, of course, but she wasn't glued to it. She would set it down on the kitchen counter, forget it in her bag for hours, leave it charging on her nightstand without a second thought. Now, it was different. She kept it close. Too close. It was always in her pocket, in her hand, or face down on the table. The moment it buzzed, she grabbed it quickly, glancing at the screen before locking it again. And when she was texting, she angled the phone away from him. Just slightly, just enough. At first, Daniel thought he was imagining it. But then, one night, as they sat on the couch watching the terminal list, Olivia's phone vibrated against the coffee table. Daniel glanced at it out of habit. The screen flashed a notification from Ethan Calloway before the message quickly disappeared. Olivia snatched the phone up immediately. Too immediately. Daniel turned his head toward her. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," she said too casually. She typed something quickly, then set the phone down, this time screen side down. "Just some work stuff." Daniel hesitated before speaking again. "Kind of late for work stuff, don't you think?" Olivia didn't look at him. "You know how it is. When the market shifts, we have to move fast." That was true. He knew enough about her job to understand that. But something in her tone didn't sit right with him. The doubt was growing. Then came the sudden obligations. Olivia had always worked long hours, but she made an effort to be home for dinner when she could. Family time mattered to her. At least, it used to. Now, there were late meetings, client dinners, impromptu networking events that had never been an issue before. And the worst part? She was careful about how she told him. She didn't dump all the excuses on him at once. No, she spread them out, mixed them into normal conversations like they weren't a big deal. "Hey, don't wait up for me tonight. Some out-of-town execs are in for a meeting, and the team's taking them out for drinks. Lunch plans tomorrow with some partners from the San Francisco branch. It might run late. Last-minute strategy session after work. I'll probably just grab dinner at the office." Daniel wanted to believe her. He really did. But something about the way she delivered these explanations felt rehearsed. Like she had already thought them through before telling him. Like she was making sure they sounded natural. And when he asked for details, who she was meeting, what the occasion was, her answers were vague. Just enough information to be believable, but never specific enough to be verifiable. One night, as she was getting ready to head out, he leaned in the doorway of their bedroom, watching her. "You sure you have to go?" he asked, forcing a smile. "We haven't had a proper date night in a while." Olivia hesitated, just for a second. Barely noticeable, but Daniel caught it. Then, she laughed lightly and adjusted her earrings. I know. Things have just been crazy lately. But I promise we'll do something soon, okay? Who's going tonight?" She zipped up her black clutch. "Oh, the usual group. Anyone I know?" She turned, gave him a quick peck on the cheek. "Just work people, babe. I gotta go." And just like that, she was gone. Then came the night everything changed. It was a Wednesday, just past 11 p.m. Daniel had put the kids to bed hours ago, and he was lying on the couch, mindlessly scrolling through his phone. Olivia had mentioned earlier that she was working late, but when he texted her to ask when she'd be home, she didn't answer. An hour passed, then another. At 12:17 a.m., his phone finally buzzed. Olivia, just wrapping up now. Long day. I'll be home soon. Something about the message felt off. Daniel sat up. His fingers hovered over his phone before he did something he had never done before. He called her. It rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then, hey. Her voice was soft, hushed. Daniel frowned. You okay? Yeah, she said quickly. Just tired. Something about the way she said it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Where are you? He asked, keeping his tone light. She hesitated. Too long. Then, still at the office. Daniel's jaw clenched. Can you FaceTime me real quick? Silence. It lasted too long. Long enough for his heart to start hammering against his ribs. Finally, Olivia let out a small, nervous laugh. Babe, it's past midnight. I look awful. That wasn't an answer. And she knew it. Daniel swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. Come on. Just a quick one. More silence. Then, I have to go, she said, her voice rushed. I'll be home soon. And the line went dead. Daniel sat there, staring at his phone. For the first time since those photos arrived, he stopped lying to himself. Something was wrong. Terribly, undeniably wrong. Daniel sat in his truck, gripping the steering wheel so tightly he thought he was about to rip it off. The rain drummed steadily against the windshield, distorting the neon glow of the Seattle skyline reflected in the wet pavement. He had parked in a nearly empty lot outside Carter and Associates, a nondescript brick building tucked between a Thai restaurant and a pawn shop in the heart of Belltown. For the last few days, his mind had been a battlefield, waging war between doubt and suspicion. But after that late-night call, after that hesitation in Olivia's voice, he had finally reached a breaking point. He needed answers. Real ones. And Jack Carter was the man who could get them. Jack had been recommended by Mark, who had once used him to dig into a shady contractor trying to scam his company. He's ex-FBI, Mark had said. Smart, discreet, doesn't waste time. That was exactly what Daniel needed. He took a deep breath and stepped out of the truck, the cold Seattle air biting against his skin as he pulled his jacket tighter. He climbed the short set of stairs and pushed open the glass door. A small bell chimed as he entered, announcing his arrival. The office was simple, dimly lit, with dark wood furniture and an old-school detective feel. The scent of coffee and aged paper hung in the air. Behind the desk sat a man in his late 40s, graying at the temples, wearing a navy button-up with the sleeves rolled up. He glanced up from his laptop and gave Daniel a slow, assessing look. You must be Daniel, he said, standing and offering a firm handshake. His grip was strong, the handshake of a man who had spent years sizing people up. Daniel nodded. Mark told me you were the best. Jack gave a slight smirk. That depends on what you need me for. Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. I think my wife is seeing someone. Jack didn't react. No raised eyebrows, no sympathetic nods. Just business. You have reason to believe this? Daniel pulled out his phone and handed it over, swiping through the photos from the unknown number. Jack studied them carefully, his expression unreadable. Then Daniel told him about the late nights, the guarded phone habits, the call that sent ice through his veins. When he finished, Jack leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. You want confirmation, he said. I want the truth. Jack nodded. Then let's get started. The next few days felt like an eternity. Jack had assured Daniel that he'd work fast, but the waiting was unbearable. Every time Olivia left for work, every time she picked up her phone, Daniel's mind spiraled. He was suddenly hyper-aware of everything. The way she grabbed her purse with just a little more urgency, how she hesitated before answering a call, the way she avoided looking him in the eye when he asked about her day. Jack kept him updated with short, efficient texts. Tuesday, 9:15 p.m. She left the office late. Drove straight home. Wednesday, 10:45 p.m. Client dinner checked out. No anomalies. Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Following up on new lead. Will update. Then, Friday came, and everything changed. Daniel was at work when Jack called. He had been in the middle of running diagnostics on a client's network security system when his phone vibrated on the desk. Seeing Jack's name sent a surge of adrenaline through him. He grabbed the phone and stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. Yeah. Jack's voice was calm, steady. We need to meet. Daniel's stomach turned. That bad? Just get down here. 15 minutes later, Daniel was back in Jack's office, sitting across from him. The blinds were drawn, the room cast in muted gray light. Jack had a folder sitting on the desk, thick with printed documents and photos. I wanted to be thorough before bringing this to you, Jack said, sliding the folder forward. But there's no doubt anymore. Daniel hesitated before opening it. His hands felt strangely numb as he flipped the cover back. The first image hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. Olivia, the Four Seasons Hotel, downtown Seattle. She was stepping out of her black Audi Q5, looking around before heading toward the entrance. The next photo, Ethan Calloway, arriving 10 minutes later. Daniel flipped through, his vision blurring at the edges. A series of timestamps told the whole story. Olivia checking in at 6:42 p.m. Ethan arriving at 6:52 p.m. Both heading up in the elevator. Then, 2 hours later, them leaving. Separately. Careful. But not careful enough. Jack tapped the last photo. Security footage from the hotel lobby. That's them. Daniel couldn't breathe. He had hoped, God, he had hoped that this was all some misunderstanding. That maybe he was just being paranoid, overthinking things. That maybe Olivia really was just working late. But there it was. Hard proof. Cold, undeniable betrayal. Jack leaned back, watching him closely. They've been careful, but not perfect. This isn't the first time they've met at a hotel, and I'd bet money it won't be the last. Daniel swallowed hard, his hands clenching into fists on the table. His pulse roared in his ears. What do you want to do now? Jack asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He stared at the photos, letting the reality sink in. Then, finally, his voice came out, low and firm. I want more. Jack nodded, as if he had expected that answer. All right, we'll keep going. But if you're planning something, you'd better be smart about it. Daniel exhaled slowly, his hands still shaking as he closed the folder. Oh, I will be. Because this wasn't just about knowing anymore. This was about making sure Olivia and Ethan paid for it. Daniel had always believed that when marriages ended, it happened in one of two ways. Either in a fiery explosion of emotions or in a slow, painful unraveling. He never imagined his own marriage would collapse in silence, that the moment he knew it was over, he wouldn't yell, wouldn't demand answers. He would simply start planning. And planning was exactly what he did. It started the morning after he met with Jack Carter. He woke up before Olivia, the weight of what he had learned pressing down on him like a boulder. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the warmth of her body beside him, knowing that she had spent the night before with Ethan Calloway in some upscale hotel suite. A few months ago, he would have kissed her awake, pulled her into a lazy morning conversation about their weekend plans, maybe surprised her with coffee. Now he carefully slid out of bed, walked downstairs, and started erasing her from his life before she even knew it was happening. The first call he made was to Aaron Wolf, a well-respected divorce attorney in Seattle. Daniel had found him through a highly rated firm in Bellevue, specializing in high-net-worth divorce cases. If Olivia thought she could walk away from this without consequences, she was dead wrong. Daniel, Wolf said, after hearing the basic details, this is going to come down to preparation. You don't confront her yet. You move first, make sure your financials are in order, and build a case that guarantees you keep custody of your kids. Do you have proof of her infidelity? Daniel exhaled. I have everything. Good. That'll help with negotiations, but Washington is a no-fault divorce state, so it won't affect asset division unless she's misusing marital funds. Daniel hadn't even considered that. You mean, if she's spending money on him? Exactly. Hotel stays, trips, gifts. If we can prove she used joint funds to support the affair, we can make the argument that you deserve a larger share of the assets. But the key is securing control of your finances now. Daniel nodded, his mind already spinning. And custody? Judges don't like to split up young kids unless absolutely necessary. If you can prove that you're the more stable parent, financially and emotionally, you have a strong chance of getting full custody. Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. Then that's what I want. Aaron sighed. It won't be easy, but if you're serious, you need to act fast. Daniel didn't hesitate. Tell me what to do. That afternoon, while Olivia was at work, Daniel began quietly restructuring their finances. First, he set up a new bank account under his name at a completely different institution. He didn't touch the main account just yet. Moving large sums of money all at once would raise suspicion. Instead, he started gradually transferring smaller amounts into his new account over the next few days. Then came the credit cards. Olivia handled most of their household bills, but Daniel had his own cards tied to their joint accounts. He applied for new, personal credit lines, ensuring that when the time came, he could cut Olivia off without issue. The biggest move, however, was the house. Their 5-bedroom home in Bellevue, a beautiful modern build with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Washington, was still technically under both of their names. Wolf had advised him to secure his position before Olivia even had a chance to think about divorce. So Daniel reached out to their real estate lawyer, pretending it was a routine title transfer for estate planning purposes. Just putting things in order, Daniel had said smoothly over the phone. The paperwork arrived 3 days later. Olivia, always too trusting, barely skimmed the documents before signing them one evening after dinner, distracted by an email from work. Daniel watched as she scribbled her name at the bottom of the page, completely unaware that she had just given up ownership of the home. When she handed the papers back to him, she smiled. "What's this for again?" she asked. Daniel forced himself to smile back. "Just a precaution. You know, in case something happens to me." She nodded, already turning back to her laptop. "Makes sense." Daniel stood there, holding the signed papers, knowing he had just made his biggest move yet. The next step was gathering evidence for custody. Daniel began documenting everything. Every late night, every vague excuse, every time Olivia left the house looking too put together for a supposed client meeting. He retrieved their bank statements, highlighting Olivia's charges that didn't add up: expensive dinners, unexplained hotel bookings, airline tickets he hadn't known about. Jack Carter sent him a detailed report, listing the dates and locations of every meeting between Olivia and Ethan. Included were hotel receipts under Olivia's name, timestamps from surveillance footage, and screenshots of their messages, which Jack had managed to recover. When Daniel saw the messages, he nearly crushed his phone in his hand. Olivia wasn't just careless, she was reckless. She had been sending Ethan money, disguising it as business expenses on her work card. She had paid for their hotel stays. She had spent money meant for their family on another man. That was the final piece of the puzzle: misuse of marital assets. It was all Daniel needed to make sure she walked away from this with nothing. For the next week, Daniel kept up the charade. He kissed Olivia goodbye in the mornings. He asked about her day. He helped the kids with their homework, read Ava her bedtime stories, took Leo to his soccer games. But inside, he was already living in a different world. One where Olivia was no longer part of their family. The day he finalized his plans, he sat alone in his truck outside his lawyer's office, staring at the manila folder containing everything: bank statements, legal filings, custody petitions, and the divorce papers. The papers that would end his marriage. The papers that Olivia had no idea were coming. He took a deep breath, gripping the folder tightly. It was almost time. She just didn't know it yet. Daniel had always been a man of logic. In his job as a cybersecurity analyst, everything followed a pattern: numbers, codes, systems. If you understood the system, you could exploit its weaknesses. That was exactly how he planned to take Olivia and Ethan down. Now that he had the financials in order, the custody case prepped, and the divorce papers ready, he had only one goal left: to ensure they had no way of denying what they had done. And he was going to make sure their fall was spectacular. It started with a flight itinerary Olivia had carelessly left on the kitchen counter. Daniel had walked into the house late after picking up Leo from soccer practice. Olivia wasn't home. She had texted earlier that she was working late again. That phrase had lost all meaning now. As he set down his keys, his eyes flicked over a folded United Airlines confirmation email The words Seattle-Tacoma, SEA, San Francisco Airport, standing out in bold. Daniel picked it up, scanning the details. She was flying out Friday morning and returning Sunday evening. He exhaled slowly, staring at the document. This wasn't just a business trip. It was their trip. He reached for his phone and called Jack Carter. "I have a job for you," Daniel said the moment Jack picked up. Jack didn't hesitate. "Tell me where and when." The pieces started falling into place. Jack had contacts in San Francisco, a few ex-FBI guys who worked private surveillance now. With their help, he set up a full-scale operation to document every second of Olivia and Ethan's little getaway. The plan was simple: track their movements, from the airport to the hotel, from the hotel to wherever they went. Secure video and photographic evidence, hotel check-ins, dinner reservations, any moment where their business trip clearly became something else. Record conversations. If Olivia or Ethan said anything incriminating, it would be caught on audio. Jack assured him, "We'll get everything." That was all Daniel needed to hear. Friday morning arrived, and Daniel played his part perfectly. As Olivia stood by the front door, suitcase in hand, he kissed her cheek. "Have a good trip," he said, forcing a smile. She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'll call you later." Liar. Daniel watched from the window as she climbed into her Uber, his heart beating steadily. He had no intention of waiting for her call. Jack was already 2 steps ahead, tracking Olivia's movements the moment she reached the airport. Within hours, the updates started rolling in. 9:35 a.m., SEA. Olivia boards United Flight 1682. Sitting in first class. Ethan joins her 5 minutes later. 11:52 a.m., SFO. Landed. Olivia and Ethan leave together, sharing a ride to the Four Seasons. Daniel clenched his jaw. He had stayed at the Four Seasons in San Francisco before. It wasn't just a business hotel, it was luxury. Ocean view suites, champagne in the lobby, a rooftop terrace perfect for intimate dinners. Not exactly where you'd hold a strategy meeting. Jack's next message confirmed it. 1:45 p.m. Checked in. Single suite, 20th floor. Daniel exhaled through his nose, steadying himself. He wasn't sure why he still felt that sharp sting in his chest. He already knew. He had known for weeks. But seeing it in real time was something else. And they weren't even trying to hide it. By Saturday night, Daniel had more evidence than he could have hoped for. Jack's surveillance team had been ruthless. Long-range lenses, hidden cameras, microphones picking up every careless whisper. Footage of Olivia and Ethan at a high-end restaurant in downtown San Francisco, leaning in too close, laughing like nothing else in the world mattered. Recordings of their conversations, Olivia gushing about how free she felt, Ethan murmuring something about finally being together without sneaking around. Video of them walking hand in hand through the hotel lobby, disappearing into the elevator together. Every piece of it was damning. Every piece of it was perfect. Jack called that evening, his tone businesslike. "We have everything. How do you want to use it?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring out at the dark Seattle skyline. His fingers drummed against his desk. "I want them exposed," he said quietly, "publicly, when it matters the most." Daniel spent Sunday crafting the final stage of his plan. He knew exactly when and where it would happen. Monday morning, 9 a.m., at the quarterly executive board meeting at Merrick and Caldwell's headquarters in downtown Seattle. Olivia and Ethan were scheduled to lead the presentation, summarizing the results of their so-called business trip. The board would be there. The partners. The executives. And Daniel was going to burn their world to the ground in front of every single one of them. The first step was slipping a USB drive into Olivia's work bag Sunday night. Inside were the photos, the surveillance footage, the recorded conversations, all embedded into the very presentation she and Ethan would be showing. Then, he sent a copy of the evidence to Merrick and Caldwell's board of directors. No context, no explanations, just the cold, hard truth delivered straight to their inboxes before the meeting even started. And finally, he arranged for the final blow. A last-minute client request for a live stream of the presentation to be recorded and archived for future reference. That way, when Olivia and Ethan realized what was happening, there would be no way to stop it. It would all be caught on camera. Their downfall would be broadcast in real time. By the time Olivia walked through the front door Sunday night, exhausted from her trip, Daniel was already sitting on the couch, his laptop open, watching the final version of the presentation play through. She smiled at him. "Miss me?" Daniel smiled back. "More than you'll ever know." Tomorrow, she would learn just how much. Monday morning arrived with an eerie calm. The sky over Seattle was overcast, heavy clouds stretching across the skyline, casting a muted gray over the glass towers downtown. The air was thick with the scent of damp pavement as Daniel parked a block away from Merrick and Caldwell's headquarters, the towering 52-story skyscraper that loomed over Fifth Avenue. Inside that building, Olivia and Ethan were about to walk into their own destruction. Daniel checked his phone. 8:45 a.m. The meeting would start in 15 minutes. He exhaled slowly, gripping the steering wheel, steadying his pulse. His plan was already in motion. The board members would soon receive physical copies of the evidence, all packaged in neat envelopes, set to arrive in the conference room precisely as the meeting began. The presentation was rigged. Daniel had remotely embedded the footage into the slides, ensuring it would play at the right moment. The controls were blocked, thanks to Daniel's cybersecurity skills. Once the presentation started, neither Ethan nor Olivia would be able to stop it. There was nothing left to do now but wait. He stepped out of the car, adjusted his jacket, and walked toward a nearby cafe with large windows that gave him a direct view of the building's lobby. He ordered a black coffee, took a seat by the glass, and waited. Inside the boardroom, 9 a.m. The 34th floor conference room was packed. The board of directors, senior executives, and key investors sat around the long mahogany table, while junior analysts and department heads lined the back of the room. A massive LED screen dominated the far wall, ready to display the highly anticipated results of Olivia and Ethan's San Francisco trip. Ethan stood at the front of the room, his usual smug confidence on full display. Olivia sat beside him, flipping through printed reports, making last-minute adjustments. She had no idea that every single person in that room was about to witness her downfall. Ethan cleared his throat and straightened his tie. "Good morning, everyone," he said, flashing a rehearsed corporate smile. "Olivia and I are excited to present our findings from last week's client meetings in San Francisco. This trip was essential in securing." Before he could finish his sentence, the conference room doors opened. An assistant entered, pushing a small cart with a stack of sealed manila envelopes. She moved swiftly, placing one in front of each board member before silently exiting the room. Confused murmurs filled the space as the executives picked up the envelopes, some exchanging puzzled glances before tearing them open. A tense silence followed. Then came the first voice, a woman near the end of the table. "What the hell is this?" Another board member flipped through the stack of high-resolution photographs, his face darkening. "This has to be a joke?" Ethan's confident expression faltered. "Excuse me, but can we focus on the presentation?" The screen behind him flickered. A pause. Ethan turned slightly, confusion creasing his face. He clicked the remote in his hand. Nothing changed. He clicked again. Still nothing. The slide he expected didn't appear. Instead, a video began playing. Daniel smirked as he remotely locked Ethan out of the system. The controls were frozen. No amount of clicking or unplugging the laptop would stop what was about to happen. At first, the room remained silent, unsure if this was part of the presentation. But then, a timestamp appeared in the corner. Friday, 6:42 p.m. Four Seasons Hotel, San Francisco. Olivia's face drained of color. A new image replaced it, Olivia stepping out of her Audi Q5, looking around before entering the hotel lobby. The next clip, Ethan arriving 10 minutes later, carrying an overnight bag. Someone in the room gasped. A senior partner leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Tell me this isn't what it looks like." Another board member snapped. "What the hell is this?" Ethan tried to mask his panic. There's clearly been some kind of... But the video wasn't finished. Olivia and Ethan checking in at the front desk. The two of them laughing at dinner, sitting too close at an upscale restaurant. A zoomed-in shot of their hands touching across the table. And finally, them walking back into the hotel, disappearing into the elevator together. The room exploded with noise. The CEO, a composed older man with silver hair and sharp blue eyes, leaned forward, his expression like carved stone. Is this how you handle corporate travel, Ethan? Olivia opened her mouth, but no words came out. Ethan's jaw tightened. This is some kind of mistake. Это мошенничество, вмешалась женщина. Вы использовали средства компании для... The final blow came when the last video clip played. A recorded conversation, audio crystal clear. Olivia's voice, laughing softly. I feel so free with you. No sneaking around. No stress. Ethan's reply, finally, just us. No one to worry about. Silence. Dead silence. Then came pure chaos. Someone stood up so fast their chair screeched against the marble floor. Others shook their heads in disgust. The CEO's icy voice cut through the noise. You're both fired. Olivia let out a small, choked sound. Wait, please, No. The CEO's glare was razor-sharp. You have 1 minute to collect your things and leave this building before security removes you. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but the CEO's stony gaze silenced him. Security guards were already stepping forward. Olivia clutched the table, her knuckles white, her breathing ragged. She turned to Ethan, but his expression had already darkened. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking straight ahead, like a man who had just realized his entire world had collapsed. With nothing left to say, they stood and walked out. Humiliated, exposed, ruined. Back at the cafe, 9:30 a.m. Daniel took a slow sip of his coffee, his fingers wrapped around the warm ceramic mug. Then he saw them. First, Ethan, walking stiffly, fists clenched, face red with humiliation. He didn't even pause, just stormed through the revolving doors and disappeared into the street. Then, Olivia. She emerged moments later, eyes downcast, hugging her coat around her as if she could shield herself from reality. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, Daniel felt nothing. No pain, no regret. She had made her choices, and now she was paying for them. Daniel pulled out his phone, checked the time. 9:31 a.m. Right on schedule. The rain had started again, steady and unrelenting, as Olivia's black Audi Q5 pulled into the driveway of their Bellevue home. The tires crunched against the wet pavement, the windshield wipers working furiously before she shut the engine off. Daniel sat inside, watching from the living room window. He had expected her to rush inside, to throw open the door in a panic. But instead, she just sat there, motionless. For a moment, he wondered what was running through her mind. Maybe she thought about calling him, rehearsing what she'd say. Maybe she considered turning the car back on and driving somewhere, anywhere, to delay the inevitable. But there was no escaping it. The moment she stepped through that door, she would finally realize just how deep the ground had crumbled beneath her. Daniel exhaled, feeling a strange, quiet sense of clarity. He wasn't angry anymore. The rage that had burned in him for weeks had cooled, hardened into something sharper. This wasn't about emotions. This was about consequences. And Olivia was about to face them. She finally got out of the car, pulling her coat tighter around her body as she hurried toward the front porch. The door opened with a soft creak, and then, there she was. Olivia stood in the doorway, looking smaller than he had ever seen her. Her usually sharp, confident presence had vanished. Her makeup was smudged from tears, her shoulders slumped forward. Her emerald green blouse, the same one she had worn to work that morning, was wrinkled from a day of stress and humiliation. Daniel remained seated on the couch, calm, collected, waiting. She took one hesitant step inside, dropping her purse onto the table near the entrance. The house was too quiet, no kids, no background noise. Just the sound of her uneven breathing and the ticking of the clock on the wall. She looked at him, eyes searching. Daniel. Her voice was raw, almost pleading. He didn't speak, didn't move. For the first time in their marriage, he let her feel the silence. She took another step forward, glancing around the room as if expecting something. Maybe a fight, maybe a chance to explain herself. But when her eyes landed on the coffee table, she froze. There it was, a thick manila envelope. She knew exactly what it was before she even picked it up. Her hands trembled as she opened it, flipping through the neatly stacked pages inside. The divorce petition. The financial separation agreements. The custody filings. Everything was already done. She looked up at him, her face pale. You already? Yes, Daniel said, his voice steady. I already did. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head. You? She let out a shaky laugh, disbelieving. You planned this? All of it? Daniel tilted his head slightly. What did you expect, Olivia? His voice was quiet, almost curious. That you could do what you did, and I'd just sit here? Pretend it never happened? She swallowed hard, her breath coming faster now. Panic was setting in. Daniel, please, let's talk about this. You don't understand. I understand everything. She flinched. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his voice still frighteningly calm. I know about San Francisco. I know about the hotels. I know about the money you spent on him. Her eyes widened. Daniel, I know everything, Olivia. Silence. She pressed a hand against her forehead, exhaling shakily. It wasn't. She cut herself off, swallowing hard. I never meant. He laughed. A short, humorless sound. You never meant to get caught? Tears welled up in her eyes. No, I never meant to hurt you. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, and then, slowly, he shook his head. You didn't care enough not to. Her lip quivered, her hands gripping the divorce papers tightly. Please, can't we just take a breath and talk? We can fix this. Fix this. His voice remained eerily even. Olivia, you didn't just betray me. You betrayed our family. You lied. You stole from our accounts. You used your job, the career I supported you through, as a cover for an affair. She shook her head furiously, stepping closer. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. Tears spilled onto her cheeks. I can't lose everything, Daniel, she whispered. He looked at her, unblinking. You already have. She let out a quiet sob, her body trembling. You don't have to do this. We can. It's done, he said, standing up. You'll need to find somewhere else to stay. The house is mine now. She let out a choked gasp. What? He gestured toward the divorce packet in her hands. You signed the title transfer weeks ago. Her mouth parted slightly. Realization hit her like a freight train. She had signed the house away, to him. Her knees nearly buckled. Daniel didn't move to catch her. She turned toward the staircase, her voice breaking. The kids. They stay with me. She turned back to him, desperation in her eyes. Daniel, please, you can't. I can, he said, his tone final. And I will. She covered her mouth, shaking her head in disbelief. You're destroying me. Daniel stepped past her, opening the front door. A cold gust of night air filled the entryway. No, Olivia, he said, meeting her gaze. You destroyed yourself. And with that, he gestured toward the open door. It was time for her to leave. The air in the courtroom was heavy, thick with anticipation. King County Superior Court in downtown Seattle was quiet except for the occasional rustling of papers and muffled whispers between attorneys. The judge, Honorable Margaret Whitmore, sat at the elevated bench, flipping through the case files with a sharp, discerning gaze. Daniel sat at the plaintiff's table, his attorney Aaron Wolfe beside him. Across from them, at the defendant's table, sat Olivia. Her lawyer, Jonathan Hayes, leaned in to whisper something, but Olivia barely reacted. She was a shell of the woman she had been just weeks ago. Her once pristine business suits had been replaced with a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back in a tight, no-nonsense bun. The confident, polished demeanor she had once worn like armor was gone. Her world had crumbled, and now she was here, fighting for the remnants. Daniel kept his expression unreadable. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. Judge Whitmore cleared her throat, straightening the papers before her. I have reviewed the arguments from both parties, she said, her voice firm, authoritative. Mr. Bennett, you have petitioned for full custody of your children, exclusive ownership of the marital home, and child support payments from Ms. Bennett. Daniel nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Whitmore turned to Olivia. Ms. Bennett, you have contested the custody request, citing that despite your recent termination from employment, you are capable of providing a stable environment for your children. Olivia sat up a little straighter. Yes, Your Honor. The judge exhaled, setting the papers down. Let's address the primary concern, custody of the children. The room tensed. Daniel held his breath. Judge Whitmore continued. Washington state law prioritizes the best interests of the child when determining custody arrangements. Given the evidence presented, she lifted a particular set of documents, including financial mismanagement, documented neglect of parental duties, and a pattern of deception within the marriage. I find that Mr. Bennett has demonstrated a more stable and consistent parental environment. Daniel's grip on the edge of the table tightened. Therefore, Whitmore said, pausing just long enough to let Olivia feel the weight of what was coming, full legal and physical custody of Leo and Ava Bennett is awarded to Mr. Bennett. A sharp gasp escaped Olivia's lips. She turned to her lawyer, panic flaring in her eyes. No, that's not. Whitmore lifted a hand, silencing her. Ms. Bennett, you will be granted supervised visitation, pending further review. If circumstances improve, modifications may be made. Daniel exhaled slowly, feeling a weight he had been carrying for weeks begin to lift. The house, the kids, their lives. It was his. Whitmore wasn't finished. Now, regarding the division of assets, she flipped through another document. Given that the marital home was transferred solely to Mr. Bennett's name prior to filing, and considering Ms. Bennett's current financial instability, the court will not require the sale or division of the property. Mr. Bennett will retain sole ownership of the home. Olivia closed her eyes as if she could shut out reality. Additionally, given the financial records provided, Ms. Bennett's personal spending habits, and the misappropriation of joint funds for non-marital activities, the court finds it reasonable to assign child support payments. Therefore, Ms. Bennett will pay $1,800 per month in child support to Mr. Bennett, effective immediately. The final nail in the coffin. Olivia visibly sagged, her shoulders collapsing inward. Judge Whitmore tapped her gavel once. This court is adjourned. Daniel stood, shaking hands with Aaron Wolf. You did it, Wolf murmured. Daniel nodded, but his eyes were locked on Olivia as she buried her face in her hands. This wasn't victory. This was simply the end of something that had been dying long before he even knew it. That evening, the house felt different, lighter. Daniel walked through the halls of their Lake Washington home, running his fingers along the familiar walls, past the framed photos of Leo and Ava, past the kitchen where he had spent so many late nights wondering when everything had changed. Now, the question didn't matter. What mattered was moving forward. A car pulled into the driveway. Daniel stepped onto the porch, arms crossed, as Olivia climbed out of the back seat of an Uber. Her suitcase, one single suitcase, was wheeled behind her. She looked up at him, her face unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she let out a weak, hollow laugh. So this is how it ends. Daniel's expression didn't change. It ended a long time ago. Her eyes flickered with something. Pain, regret, exhaustion. Maybe all three. She glanced past him, at the house she had once called home. Can I? She cleared her throat. Can I at least say goodbye to them? Daniel studied her for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. She walked in slowly, as if every step inside was heavier than the last. Leo and Ava were in the living room, playing with a set of Legos. When they looked up and saw her, there was a moment of hesitation. Then Ava, innocent and young, ran toward her. Mommy! Olivia dropped to her knees, wrapping Ava in a tight embrace. I love you, baby, she whispered. Leo, older and more aware, stood back. His small fists clenched at his sides, his lip trembling. Olivia turned to him, reaching out. Leo. He hesitated. Then, slowly, he stepped forward and hugged her. Briefly, stiffly, but it was something. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet, but he wiped them quickly. Are you coming back? Daniel stiffened. Olivia's breath hitched. She swallowed hard. Not for a while, sweetheart. Leo's face darkened. He nodded slowly, then turned away. Daniel stepped forward. It's time. She stood, nodding once, but before she walked past him, she whispered, I never wanted it to be like this. Daniel's voice was steady. Neither did I. She stepped onto the porch, pulling the suitcase behind her. The Uber was waiting. She hesitated at the bottom of the steps, looking back one last time. But Daniel didn't move. He stood in the doorway, watching, waiting, unshaken. She finally turned away, climbed into the car, and drove off into the night. Daniel exhaled, long and slow, before stepping inside and closing the door. For the first time in months, there was peace. Share your thoughts in the comments. Should Daniel have let Olivia have more visitation rights, or was the court's ruling fair? If you like this story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like. Bye-bye.